Hello and welcome to How to Build Your Own Engineering Lab. My name is Joe Luttrell and I am the founder and chief engineer for Minicubes LLC. What we do is we design micro miniature satellites to go into orbit. We work with what we call nanosats or CubeSats or pocket cubes. These are the types of satellites that are pretty much cutting edge. And we do that right here in Akron, Pennsylvania. So how do we go about doing all of that? How did we create a lab that would allow us to build all of these things? Well, we took it one step at a time. We're going to cover a couple of things about what you should have in a studio, a lab, a makerspace that's important to you. And also we want to provide some information about how you get started. I mean, what do you need to start an engineering studio? All right, let's take a look at a couple of things, starting with personal protection. The first thing I want to cover with you today is personal protection equipment, or PPE. Before you do anything in a lab, it's very important that you protect yourself. And it's very easy to lose an eye, damage your lungs, or lose a finger if you're using heavy equipment. So we want to cover a couple of things that will help you stay safe while you're in the lab. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at, we always have gloves. These are nitrile gloves. They work really well. They don't react with a lot of chemicals, and they're just overall a good thing to have around. I use these all the time, no matter what chemicals I'm working with, unless it happens to be acids. When I'm working with acids or extremely caustic bases, I actually have a pair of gloves specifically designed to do that. They're kind of expensive, but for the type of work we're doing, they're very important. Okay. Always have a box of these on hand. You can never go wrong with having them. Okay. Better to have and not need than need and not have. Okay. All right. So gloves are important. Another thing that's important are respiration. Okay, most people are familiar with this type of a mask. It's just a simple little surgical mask that you put over your face to keep dust and debris out while you're breathing. Those are great if you're doing basic things, but sometimes you need something a little heavier duty. Okay, that's why we have here in the shop, we have these respirators. This is very important when you're working with things like paints or very light solvents, something that is designed to either etch metal, or in some cases you might want to use this if you're working with a resin printer like we have over here in the corner. They do emit a lot of vapors that are not healthy for you, so it's good to have one of these. Another thing you can do is also have proper ventilation in your studio. I have a series of fans that are built into the ceiling in this place that allow us to keep the air circulating constantly. It's just another preventive measure to protect our lungs. It's very easy to damage your lungs, and a lot of times the damage does not show up for several years. So it's always a good thing to have. Okay? Always have safety glasses of some sort. Okay? I have several different types here that I want to show you. Everything from your basic safety glasses. These are polycarbonate. They deflect a lot of debris, especially non-metallics. If you're dealing with wood, if you get that in your eye, you've lost your eye more than likely. I've had the unfortunate pleasure of seeing those types of accidents when I worked in construction. Wear safety glasses. Okay. When you're working with chemicals, however, safety glasses are not going to cut it. You really should have something that protects the sides of your face. These actually come up real close, like this, and they keep any sort of splashes from getting into your eyes from the side. They're a really good thing to have. And I have different pairs of them. I even have a slightly tinted one here that I actually like the tinted version. It does cut down on some glare while you're working, and you can never ever have too much safety, especially when it comes to glare while you're working. Another set of glasses that we have are designed for working with ultraviolets. Again, we have a resin printer here. We have a laser etcher here. We want to make certain that we protect our eyes while those devices are being used. And so we have these glasses. Oh, another thing that we do have in the lab is we have a UV light that's designed to harden resins or sterilize various equipment. These are a necessity when you're working with that kind of stuff. Okay? All right, two more things we want to cover. Again, when you're working with heavy gear, you might need to have hearing protection. These are an over-the-ear set. They work real well. You can also get the kind that go in the ear and have a little cord. Those are good to have. I prefer the over-the-ear simply because they have more of a noise protection system in them. They're just really good to have. Okay? Finally, in the gear side of things, we want to make certain that we have some sort of coveralls if we're working with chemicals. Now, for me, while I'm in the clean room, and we do have a one-man clean room over here, I use the Tyvek coveralls. Tyvek is really good for keeping a lot of dust and debris out. These get taped around my hands along with nitrile gloves. I have little booties that I have to put on. This is what we use in the clean room. But when I'm working with chemicals, I'll actually grab myself one of these. Yes, it's a lab coat. Lab coats are great because they keep you safe from spills. You don't want to get, if you're working with various chemicals that can stain or cause problems like resin, you really want to have your regular clothing protected. Okay? So one of these, yes, it looks dorky, but they're a lifesaver, at least as far as your clothing is concerned. Okay? In addition to personal protection gear, it's important to keep your lab clean. Okay? That means using a dustpan and a little dust brush, having a vacuum handy when you have particles that get all over the place. I also keep a series of cleaners on hand. I have natural cleaners just for cutting out grease. I have Windex over here on the shelf. I have alcohol in different strengths, for everything from 91% to 99%, and we use that for cleaning up whatever spills we need to worry about. And that means having lots of shop towels on hand. Okay, I happen to use these blue ones here. They're really, really good. You can get them at Home Depot or other different locations. Harbor Freight has them, Direct Tools has them. They're just good, handy things to have in the shop. Again, they're very heavy duty, they absorb a lot of stuff, they work well. And we have normal paper towels, and we have cotton towels as well for dealing with things that we don't worry about, having to wash out of a cloth. Good thing to have. Okay? I know I'm going through a lot of things very quickly, but we're going to continue just moving forward with... Stop. That's the basics of personal protection gear or personal protection equipment. We're going to step on to how do we move forward with our lab. Those are just a few of the things in personal protection equipment that we highly recommend if you're putting together some sort of an engineering lab. These are the basics. They can be expensive to acquire, but they're good to have. Again, it's more important to spend the money on good personal protection equipment and protect yourself than it is to worry about just getting hurt. Don't get hurt. All right? Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about how you build out your space. So my current setup is broken into 3 distinct pieces. Upstairs in the house we have our design studio. This is where we actually do all of our computer work and make things in the digital world that we're going to turn into real objects later. Okay, then we have a second section. This is called the craft area down here. This is where I actually design smaller pieces, work on models, and of course deal with anything around the house that needs to be repaired. The area is broken down into several small sections. One, a large table that I can work on with all of my various parts that I need to fix. And then I have an organizer over here on this side. That organizer allows me to just find things quickly. It's a simple drawer setup. And of course, I have a series of scissors and cutters and various things that you need in order to actually do the work that you're trying to accomplish. I also have a library of various things. These include how-to books, a couple of travel guides just for fun, and an assortment of various components that I'm working on, such as models for my side hobbies or whatever. An important thing to remember about this craft area, this is very tiny. It's approximately 7 feet across and maybe 5 feet deep. It isn't a lot of room, but it allows us to get done what we need to get done for these particular items. You can set up an engineering lab or a makerspace easily in this type of area. It's just a matter of what tools you need in order to do the jobs you want to do. If you're interested in 3D printing, this could be a nice little area for a little Creality or maybe a Prusa printer sitting here in the corner, and then you could file all of your filaments and spare parts over here and just use this as a nice little creation station. You can also have various knives or whatever tools that you need in order to, like, again, build models, work on rocketry. I have some small ones here, or do any sort of crafts. We also have a sewing table here in the same craft area. So if I need to manufacture anything like parachutes or just want to sew up a shirt or try something along those lines, I have the gear in order to do that. Let's say you want to do something a little bit bigger, that you're more than just doing modeling, you're doing some serious work. Well, you should consider either adapting a section of your garage, which you can do with as simple as ripping down a sheet of plywood and mounting it with some 2x4s to the wall, and boom, you've got a workspace. Add a couple of shelves above and below, and you're in business. Those are really good areas if you're more into the construction or auto mechanics, and I actually have a place out in my garage where I do those sorts of things. The next step up from using your garage is to have a dedicated space. In my case, I have a special building. It is 11 foot by 14 foot that contains all of my equipment, with the exception of my design studio and my little itty bitty craft area. The engineering studio that I have here is, in my personal opinion, pretty neat. We can do just about anything in this location. It's big enough to allow for a center table that we use. We have our clean room in the corner. We have storage, electronics area, and then we have our 3D printing and CNC area. So this is where all the heavy stuff gets done in this particular room. Because we're building satellites, we have to have all of this stuff. And everything from looking at circuit boards to actually manufacturing circuit boards, we can do it here. That's just part of what our needs are. Your needs will be different. But the recommendation I would have is, regardless of your space, keep yourself organized. Always have storage containers that show what is inside them. Note that I have these back here on the wall. All of them are labeled with their contents. If you stay organized, regardless of the size of your space, you will have an easier time of being an engineer. Keep things organized. So, that's simple. As far as storage systems, I highly recommend using Sterilite containers. I have them in two major sizes. I have the large containers that go underneath my shelving, and then I have the little tiny ones that you see up on top. They're great for the various things that you're doing. If you're storing large equipment or large supplies, the big boxes work. If you're doing little tiny detailed pieces like various electronic components, those work well. For anything smaller than that, like nuts, bolts, and screws, consider wall-mounted units. Those work. Let's talk a moment about purchasing tools and supplies. Now that you've got an idea for what type of space you want to use, you really should select the tools that you're going to use in that space. For me, I'm into all kinds of different things. I've done everything from modeling to building houses, working on cars. Those sorts of things require tools, and some of these tools can be very, very expensive. So how do you decide what it is you need to buy? Well, first, what are you working on? If you're working in photography, you're going to want some cameras, you're going to want some tripods, maybe some lights, and a backdrop. If you're working on building electronics, you might want to have a simple rework station, a soldering gun, maybe an oscilloscope for testing. You might want to have your own reflow oven like we have here, or even a prototyping unit that's designed specifically for making circuit boards. Each of these tools can be either bought cheaply or expensively, but I also have a trick for you so you don't have to spend quite so much money. When you're first starting out in something, consider buying a cheap set of tools. Go out to Harbor Freight, pick them up there. They're usually fairly decent quality, but not what you would use if you were quote-unquote a professional. They do work, however, and they're great. They might be usable for 1 or 2 times, maybe a dozen, but eventually that tool is going to fail. If you continue buying cheap tools, you'll find out that very quickly it's more expensive than if you just bought the higher quality one. So, buy the cheap, study what it is you're doing. For me, when I got into 3D printing, I bought an ANET printer. It wasn't the best, but it was enough for me to get started. And then when I decided that, yes, this is what I want to do, I moved on to using things like the Creality printers that you see. There's a trick, though, with buying expensive tools, and that is buy last year's model. As an example, I have a tripod here that I purchased. I bought last year's model for just under $100. Normally, if I were to buy it brand new, it would cost $400. So look for those deals. You can find them if you're very, very careful and you don't have to worry about time. If, however, time is essential for you getting something done and you need the quality tool, by all means, spend the money. It is well worth having a good set of tools that are easily maintained than it is to buy cheap tools that are hard to maintain and you'll just end up throwing out later. Okay, so you've got a little tiny workspace that you've picked out. You've got your personal protection equipment. You've selected your tools. What now? What else is there? The last thing you need to be worried about is proper cleaning. This is often overlooked when people have an engineering area or a makerspace, but cleanup is important. Probably the number one thing you need to worry about other than yourself with PPE. I mentioned having different cleaners available, but what sort of methodologies do you use? Well, as soon as you are done with a project or done for the day, make certain you give yourself about 15 minutes afterward so you can clean up properly. In the case of a resin printer that I have here, that involves the use of a lot of 99% alcohol, scrubbing every surface down that I have come in contact with, and then I check it under a UV light to see if there's any exposure. Once I have all of that figured out, all cleaned up, all of that material is exposed to UV, intense UV, so that it solidifies and is no longer a problem because resin can be toxic. That then goes into a special trash can and is taken out. In the case of other things like you're working with sanding down some plastic parts, as soon as you're done, sweep the area, vacuum the area, wipe everything down with a good cleaner. This will keep you from developing a bad habit of just letting things build up. Then it becomes hard to find your equipment, hard to find your projects, and hard to deal with debris. In the case of some of the electronics that I work on, if I don't take care of the debris, the electronics won't work. And especially for satellites, since we're in a clean room, that room has to be clean. Everything that we do in there is near sterile. So yeah, we have to take extreme precautions. When we go in, everything is wiped down. We do the work we need to. It is sealed off. We then wipe everything else down again before we exit the room. You don't have to be that detailed if you're running your own makerspace or engineering lab, but it depends on what you're doing. Cleanliness is important. It's the last thing I'm recommending, but it is one of the first things you need to be concerned about when you develop your engineering space. So you've decided that you're going to go ahead and build your own engineering lab. Well, how do you get started? Easy. You just start. Decide what it is that you're going to do, and then outline it. Put together a plan and see what materials you need. You don't always have to have everything you need to get started. Don't worry about missing tools. You can figure it out. The idea is get moving first with a general plan and fill in the details as you go along. For me, one of the things that helped me get started before I had anything to work with as an engineering space was I worked with Make 717. I became an early adopter of the facility, and I worked with their machines and just talked with other people who were interested in the same things I was, learned from them, developed the habits that I needed in order to do what it is I do today. If you don't have access to a space that you can use, consider a makerspace. Make 717, shameless plug here, is a wonderful place to start. You'll learn a lot by watching others and interacting with them. So consider that as an option. Finally, remember, making engineering, it's not a degree, it is a mindset. What you're trying to do is take scientific knowledge, whatever it is that you're interested in, physics, chemistry, mathematics, and putting them together to create something that no one has seen before, or at least something that you want to see. Don't let your lack of those materials, lack of knowledge, lack of experience stop you. The important part, get started. It's real easy to do, hard to continue with, but it's worth the journey in the end. And I recommend everyone at least take a little bit of time in their lives and become a maker. Normally about this time in a presentation, I would take questions and answers. But since this is pre-recorded, that's going to be a little tough. Instead, right here is my email address. If you want to get in touch with me to take a tour of the facilities we have here at Minikubes, or you want to learn more about being an engineer or setting up your own engineering lab or makerspace, feel free to contact me. If you have any questions, I'm there for you. It truly has been a pleasure putting this video together for you, and I hope that you enjoy making in the future. Take care.